So our friend Khanna, from time to time, has let us down. The time most recently that he let us down was when he was defending the honor of Joe Manchin and talking about how, look, it's just a gentleman's disagreement and we have to find a way to make a deal, and the way to do that is not to attack him or viciously go after him. And that's just something I fundamentally disagree with, because I think Joe Manchin is not the most conservative Democrat. I think Joe Manchin is one of the most corrupt Democrats, along with Kyrsten Sinema. Whenever there's some left-wing policy that they oppose, it is not on ideological and philosophical grounds. It's because their donors paid them to oppose it. So Kyrsten Sinema was getting in the way of lowering all prescription drug prices, not just for seniors, and it's because she took like $1 million from Big Pharma. Joe Manchin, a lot of the things that first of all, he flip-flopped a million times. I'm in favor of this policy. Okay, let's do a deal with that policy. I don't want that policy. He would go back and forth like crazy, and of course, he's paid by the fossil fuel industry, and so he was dedicated to weakening any sort of attempt to fight back against climate change. Any policy agenda that in his mind went too far, he would crush it. And so, yeah, no, my way of dealing with somebody like Joe Manchin is different. Yeah, I'd give him a chance to be reasonable, but then if he's not, well, then we're going to start playing politics and using the bully pulpit and trying to get him to fall in line. Anyway, Khanna disagrees with that. He thinks you got to, treat him kind and fair and treat him like an honest actor, and that was really getting under my skin. Well, now we have an issue where it is the return of based Khanna, because the CPC, Congressional Progressive Caucus, released a letter. It was 30 politicians, 30 representatives in the House, who said, hey, Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. Russia is doing imperialism. We stand in solidarity with the innocent people of Ukraine. But let's also have negotiation and diplomacy and talks with Russia because, what's at stake here is nuclear annihilation, and we can't afford to roll the dice with that or have poor communication. So then Pramila Jayapal, the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, retracted that letter. First she clarified, then she was like, oh, there's too much backlash. I retract the letter. And that just drove me absolutely fucking crazy, because it's like, well, what do you people actually believe? Do you have no real beliefs on what's happening in Russia and Ukraine? Is it just, do you just like go wherever the party leadership demands you go? Like, how exactly does this work? And it's really pathetic, because again, we're talking about nuclear war here, and you should spend a lot of time thinking about what your real position on that is and then act accordingly. But it's just like, they're just following the crowd of the Democratic leaders, and they're ultimately in a preposterous position now because they're just flat out on the neocon side. It's just like, yeah, endless arms, endless money, endless weapons to Ukraine, and zero negotiation and diplomacy. And it's like, that is the exact same position as like fucking Bill Kristol, right? Like, fuck you. Well, Khanna comes out and bucks the entire party establishment and says, no, you're wrong. You shouldn't have retracted the letter, and I agree with the letter completely. Now, he's going to say some things here, little bits here and there that I don't agree with, but the overall gist of what he's saying, I think, is correct, and he's brave because he's the only politician saying it. Guys, Bernie Sanders was even in favor of retracting the letter. Bernie Sanders. That's a massive letdown from Bernie. Well, let's hear what Khanna has to say.
Well, a group of House Democrats is now withdrawing a letter they sent to the White House. That letter had urged the Biden administration to shift his strategy on the Ukraine war and pursue direct negotiations with Russia. But the message angered other Democrats because they felt that it revealed new divisions within their party just days before the November midterms. Well, now Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal says, quote, the letter was drafted several months ago, but unfortunately was released by staff without vetting. She went on to say, as chair of the caucus, I accept responsibility for this. Joining me now is a member of that progressive caucus, Congressman Khanna. Thank you so much for joining us here on set. So this has turned really into a messy own goal on the part of your caucus. What happened?
Well, Bianna, let me just say what my position is, which matters. I have supported every package of giving aid to Ukraine, and I plan to support continuing to arm Ukraine. All the letter said is that we, at the same time that we stand with Ukraine, need to make sure that we're reducing the risk for nuclear war, that we're engaging in talks with the Russians to make sure that the conflict doesn't escalate. We need to support Ukraine with arms, and we need diplomacy. That's common sense.
Well, Congressman.
All right, so let me just pause here to say the part I disagree with him about is, yeah, endless arms to Ukraine. No, that becomes a military-industrial complex slush fund We don't even have a tracking mechanism to know where all the weapons are going. And yes, some of them are winding up in the hands of the Azov battalion, which are literal card-carrying neo-Nazis. So the idea of like, yeah, just, endless arms, endless funds, that's preposterous. We can't even get help to Jackson, Mississippi, where their entire water infrastructure failed. Like, we're not rushing help to them, but what, we can just a blank check for Ukraine? No. I don't agree with that point. But having said that, the second part of it's correct. He's like, how can we not, are you serious? How do we not negotiate or talk? I mean, this is common sense.
Jayapal seemed to suggest that this letter was a mistake. It was drafted, signed several months ago, and she's rescinded it. Do you not support that move?
I don't. I think the letter was common sense. I support making sure we arm Ukraine and provide arms to Ukraine and continue to fund it. But I also believe that the president, as he said, we're at a risk of nuclear war. Don't you think our counterparts should be talking to Russia? Of course they should, to make sure that it doesn't escalate. And, my position is similar to what former Joint Chief of Staff Mullen has said, what other senior military leaders have said. Yes, let's stand with Ukraine, but let's also support diplomacy.
So you still support this letter? It was said to have been drafted and signed early this summer. When did you sign it?
Probably in the summer, around June or July. I don't remember the exact date.
Now, notice the questions here from the host on CNN. Everything is going to be framed from a far-right, neoconservative, hawkish foreign policy perspective. You're about to see that right now.
The reason that I'm asking is because I looked at the timeline of the war and what was taking place around then. So I just want to read off some of these events. June 27th, Russian missiles target a shopping mall in central Ukraine, killing at least 18 people. On July 17th, President Zelensky says Russia has now fired 3,000 cruise missiles against his country. July 20th, in an interview, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Russia had departed from its original goal of occupying just 2 eastern regions, and now saying Zaporizhia and Kherson in the south were also important to take. Subsequently, they have illegally annexed all 4. I'm just wondering what you and your fellow caucus members saw in all of this that gave you a sense that Vladimir Putin was serious about coming to the table and discussing a ceasefire, given all of that was going on at the time.
Well, Bianna, first of all, I've been very clear that the war is brutal, it's unprovoked, and the fault is Russia's. And after that, I voted for packages to arm Ukrainians precisely for that. But what gave us pause is that there's a talk about nuclear war. What gave us pause is that Vladimir Putin is threatening to have nuclear war. Even at the height of the Cold War in this country, we had our military talk to the Russian military. We had our leaders talk to the Russians. We have a self-interest in making sure that that war doesn't escalate. And that is all that diplomacy says. It doesn't say that we don't stand with the Ukrainians. That's what I vote for every time.
According to our own defense officials, there's a 25% chance of nuclear war now. 25% chance. So if the hawkish position was correct, endless arms, endless funding, no talks whatsoever, then the risk of nuclear war would have went down from the beginning of the war. But it hasn't. It's gone up. So what that tells you is we are on the wrong track. Now, I'm not on the side of, we'll just give Vladimir Putin anything and everything he wants because he's threatening nuclear war, because that sets a horrible precedent as well of any big country can invade any small country and then make nuclear threats and then they get whatever they want. That's a terrible precedent. We don't want to set that precedent, but what we want to do is make sure we can de-escalate and get to a reasonable agreement where we give peace a chance. And then ultimately, if we go for peace, peace doesn't work because Putin breaks the deal or whatever, then we'll have that conversation. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But right now, thing number one should be de-escalate, talk, get some sort of a deal. And unfortunately, the bipartisan Washington consensus is the opposite. It's don't talk at all, no conversation whatsoever, no negotiation, no diplomacy, endless weapons, military-industrial complex gets to loot the treasury yet again, and business as usual continues. Just now, it's under threat of nuclear annihilation.
With the Cold War, we're now in a hot war, not the United States, but obviously this is between Ukraine and Russia. And Vladimir Putin has not only looked for an exit ramp, he's mobilized 200,000 plus soldiers. He is targeting civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. He's shopping for more weapons in Iran. None of this seems to suggest that he is willing or looking to de-escalate. So aren't you benefiting him by suggesting, because this is going on all through Russia?
Classic question. By even suggesting talking, even though Khanna is in favor of literally a blank check of arms and weapons to Ukraine, he's being accused of, aren't you basically a Putin puppet? Aren't you giving him whatever he wants? So is there no position other than endless hawkishness and escalation to World War III that they wouldn't criticize? So everything is pro-Putin unless you're in favor of nuclear war from a neocon perspective in the U.S. I mean, that's just psycho talk. I mean, this is like everybody's under a spell and they're all acting, irrationally. It's really wild to see.
Russian state media that this looks like the U.S., whether it's from McCarthy suggesting that if Republicans take over, that they're going to stop giving out a blank check, and now this from your caucus.
Now the problem with the McCarthy position, and it's, by the way, it's McCarthy, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's a handful of Republicans who are in favor of cutting off arms and weapons, but they haven't said anything about we need a peace deal too. It's just cut off the arms and the weapons. Okay, well, if you just cut off the arms and the weapons, then Russia's going to win. It's just a matter of time, right? So the real thing you have to do is, and from the perspective of Ro Khanna, you can use all the endless arms that go to Ukraine as a leverage in negotiations with Russia to say, yeah, like if we get a deal, then then the war's over. We'll cut off the arms, etc. But if we don't get a deal, well, then we're going to keep funding them effectively. So, in other words, Ro Khanna's position does give the U.S. some leverage in the conversation. The Marjorie Taylor Greene position, the McCarthy position is just cut off the arms. Well, that's not really an anti-war position. That's a pro-Russian imperialism position because they're just going to take over, right? So the important thing you have to do, it's twofold. You have to get a peace deal and cut off the arms. And the peace deal is the most important point, obviously. But that's not obvious to the Republicans because they don't really want peace. They're genuinely in favor of the authoritarianism of Vladimir Putin. But also, more importantly, Putin has been very clear he's going all in on the culture war as well, and he's gone after trans people, and he represents more traditional values in their minds, and that's why they kind of effectively support him.
Suggests to Russia, perhaps, that the U.S. support is not as strong as it was.
That's not true. I mean, our votes are for aid to Ukraine and arming Ukraine. But in this country, we have always had a tradition which says that you debate and discuss foreign policy. And when you have senior military leaders, senior Joint Chiefs of Staff saying we shouldn't be risking nuclear war, when you have senior leaders worried about the war escalating and thousands of people being killed as civilians, I wouldn't be doing my job as a United States congressman if I wasn't also supporting every effort at diplomacy while standing clearly with Ukraine, while clearly condemning Putin for an unprovoked illegal war. And I believe actually that's consistent with what this president has done. I think the president has handled it very strategically and diplomatically.
To Ro Khanna's point, Joe Biden said everybody in Washington, all of his staffers were telling him, do a no-fly zone, do a no-fly zone, do a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Biden said, I'm not doing it because that would require the U.S. to shoot down Russian planes. Boom, that's World War III. So Biden stood strong on that. Another thing that he did is he rejected giving Ukraine our longest range missiles because they could be used to attack Russian territory. Biden views that as an escalation. He goes, sorry, I'm not doing that. There's a number of things where Biden has kind of drawn a hard line and said, I can't do that because that is, I view that as an escalation. So what Biden has been attempting to do is go tit for tat with Putin and match him without escalating to try to send a message like, we're going to be on the side of defending Ukraine, but we're not looking for World War III effectively. Now, Biden, I don't think Biden has done that effectively. I don't think he's done that well, but that clearly is what he's trying to do. But what's crazy to see here is Ro Khanna's position, which is still endless arms to Ukraine, but also negotiate. They think he's crazy and pro-Putin because he just wants to negotiate to try to find an off-ramp here. That's crazy. So you cannot say the media in the U.S. is not fucking bloodthirsty warmongers, because they are. They are. They want the conflict to continue. There's no doubt about that. And they think this is like a fucking movie where it's just you defeat the bad guy and then everybody goes, hooray, and they go have parades at home. That's not the way the real world works. And this is a totally different era than World War II. Like, Hitler didn't have nukes, right? Putin has nukes. So if you think he's perfectly analogous to Hitler, then we're getting to a point where it's guaranteed that we're all going to lose. Because Hitler would have been crazy enough to use fucking nukes on whoever, on innocent people, right? And if you think Putin's Hitler, well, then he's also going to use them on innocent people. And so that should give you pause. That should make you think, we got to find a way out of this. And what he's saying is nowhere near unreasonable. What he's saying is, again, he says it's common sense. I totally agree with him on that front. I don't think it's common sense to give Ukraine a blank check and endless weapons, but it is common sense to say we have to talk to the other side to make sure there's no miscommunication, make sure that there are no mistakes which escalate out of control, make sure that we can avoid a worst case scenario, you know? So it's just the political climate on this issue is maddening to me. Maddening. And the Progressive Caucus backing off of a mild call for diplomacy, on this issue, they're beyond useless. And again, credit to Khanna. I don't agree with his entire position, but at least he's sticking his chin out and bucking the caucus. And this is going to piss off a lot of the people in leadership behind the scenes, but he doesn't care because he's standing on principle on this issue. So credit to him on that front. It really feels like we're in the Twilight Zone looking at the dialogue around this because everybody's lost their damn minds except Khanna. All right, guys, that's the show. I love y'all very much. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Have a lovely Halloween. I'll talk to you soon. I'm out. Peace. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.